Clearly was not the best pair in the world.
We aren't perfect.
The way life really happens. Biography, Wednesday and Thursday at 9, only on Bio. True story.
Essentially, if you understand that the Monkees was a TV show, then it's easy to kind of understand everything that followed.
Everybody in the kitchen sink auditioned for the Monkees, you know, from Stephen Stills to Paul Williams to Charlie Manson to all these different people. It's developed into some kind of folk story about the process of building this international group.
Here we come.
I was not ready for Stardom. I don't think anybody is.
We did not have any managers or agents. The producers and everyone sort of choreographed it like that they were the managers of the band and the agents, and they controlled the entire situation.
One of them said that it was like catching lightning in a bottle.
The biggest myth was that, you know, we didn't play our own music. We did play our own music, but nobody else played their own music. We were standing at the Cow Palace, 10,000 people out there, and Mike's got his guitar around his neck, and this guy says to him, "Can you really play that?"
We don't have time to get restless.
The Monkees creator, Bob Rafelson, came up with the idea of the Monkees series prior to the release of A Hard Day's Night. But his co-conspirator in the series, Bert Schneider, said that if it wasn't for the success of A Hard Day's Night, they would have never been able to sell the Monkees to the NBC network. The Beatles brought about the way for the Monkees to get on air.
But most of all, we'd like to thank the Beatles for starting it all up for us.
Nothing to lose.
Leads you to where you are today.
I believe in storytelling.
Gonna make you a star.
I'm still trying to figure that out.
The Beatles were the heroes. The Monkees were, we were servicing a market that the Beatles couldn't fulfill, that's all. You know, they kept on going where they had led.
And the whole Monkey Beatle thing, you know, to me was just ludicrous. I'd been to England, I'd met the Beatles, I was a huge fan. It's all I could do to keep from getting their autographs. I knew what the show was about. They knew. It was John Lennon, the first one to make the comparison of the Monkees to the Marx Brothers.
Say the magic word, you get $100. You don't say the magic word, you get $200. You give me $300, I'll tell you what the magic word is. That's the good business. That's good.
We're too busy singing.
You know, they don't play their own instruments, well, it looks like they are, you know. So it became a controversy that was not controversial at all, except in the minds of the fans and then, of course, by the press who mirrored that.
First time we ever played together, we were making the pilot, and we hadn't played together, not a note. And we turned up the amps and began to play at a break in the filming. Everybody got up and danced. So, you know, how bad can we be?
Take the last train to Pottsville. Now I must hang up the phone.
We were in 16 magazine and Tiger Beat magazine. Rarely did you see us in the Los Angeles Times or in Life magazine or in Newsweek. They kept us restricted from that. They wanted us not to talk about the Vietnam War or drugs or, you know, alcoholism. So all of a sudden, you got these long-haired guys on television, which wasn't that long when you think about it. And it wasn't really, you know, everybody with long hair or, you know, sort of, you know, they're into anarchy and sort of like, you know, overthrowing the government, or they were pot smokers, or, you know, they got stickers and flowers on their faces, and, you know, it was Haight-Ashbury, and it was, but it wasn't that way at all.
Even though we represented the counterculture at the time, there was nothing about the show that was anti-establishment.
I was 23 when I signed on with the Monkees, and I think you have to say that my maturity level was that of about, an 11-year-old. And now that I am considerably older, I think that my maturity level has reached well into the middle 20s.
I place the bird in the bag. I'm going to make the bird disappear. I blow up the bag.
I have to say it was probably not as much fun as it looked, but we were professionals, and we were paid to look good, look like we were having fun.
America in the 60s was a nation in the streets, with race riots lighting up the inner cities, students protesting the Vietnam War, and civil rights marches across the nation. In the world of rock, Bob Dylan was going electric. The Beatles were packing stadiums for their last concerts, and the legendary Woodstock Festival was just over the horizon. It was a decade of unprecedented tumult, rebellion, and unrest as the youth counterculture seemed poised to remake society. But the picture on American television was very different.
In the 1960s, some of the more popular programs were I Dream of Jeannie and Gilligan's Island and Bewitched. And a lot of these programs were actually being produced by Columbia Pictures company called Screen Gems. And the Monkees program was also produced by Screen Gems, so you saw a lot of crossover in content. But the Monkees was somehow unique in that it appealed to a young demographic, but it had none of the staples of the sort of the pat situation comedy. They did things just a little bit differently.
You know, it's a weird story, this whole thing.
They were invented in Hollywood as America's answer to the Beatles. Cast, costumed, and promoted in a rock and roll television sitcom. But their journey wasn't what anyone expected. They were and are the Monkees.
Here we come, walking down the street. We get the funniest looks from everyone we meet. Hey, hey, we're the Monkees.
Born in 1983, Ben Winkler was one of...
So I got rid of it and became Smart Mom instead. Use common sense. Go to commonsense.com.
In 1966, TV's top shows were mostly situation comedies. A young Hollywood producer named Bob Rafelson was trying to break into television with his own sitcom concept, a show about four struggling young musicians.
Prior to the Monkees, Bob Rafelson had been involved in television, but had been involved in a lot of productions where they didn't really go anywhere. When he met Bert Schneider, he found not only an ally for his ideas, but also somebody who was connected enough within Columbia Pictures, being that his father was one of the heads of Columbia Pictures.
They really were into it. They weren't old school. They were new school. They hired wild kids on purpose in order to get, I mean, they could have hired four very well-connected, you know, upright citizen-type actors, and and you would have gotten a very dull show out of that. And they knew better than to do that. They went with green guys, hoping that they would get some edge, and I think they did. I think they succeeded. Wore my edges right off.
When Bert Schneider first described the show to us, we thought it couldn't lose because it had all the great elements. They were going to use slapstick. Slapstick is timeless. They picked up stuff from the past, all the classic elements of comedy, combined that with pop music that was saleable.
I always remember Bob being the creative force and Bert being the business force behind it. They were a team, definitely. But it was Bob's baby, and I felt that right from the get-go.
A lot of credit has to go to the producers. They were Beatle freaks. It wasn't like, hey, the kids will love this, you know. It was they really wanted to be part of it themselves. They chose us partly hoping that they would get a performing band out of us. First of all, it had to be a decent TV show. If they didn't do that, then nothing was going to happen.
Schneider and Rafelson began by looking for four performers who had at least some musical background.
Being an actor, I was able to, you know, fit that particular need. Mickey Dolenz was the same. He'd been circus boy and he was experienced. So really you got Mike Nesmith and Peter Tork as being really the musicians and Mickey Dolenz and Davy Jones being the actors. But we ended up being really four musicians and four actors.
All of them had had previous acting experience and musical experience. Davy had a group very, very early on in his career and performed on stage in the musical Oliver and was really from the theater, but also was a great singer and great performer.
Everything was around the church. You know, my mum played the organ, my sisters ran the youth club, and I was, you know, in the Boy Scouts. And it was, you know, just it was a very plain and ordinary and obvious life, you know, that everybody grew up to do, you know, in the streets of Manchester.
His father was a steam fitter in Manchester, and I mean, my parents were academics.
Peter Tork had grown up in Connecticut and had gotten involved in folk music very early on, had DJ'd at his college, and had made the rounds as a folk performer.
Well, I was born into a showbiz family. My mother and father were both in show business. My father was a singer, an actor, and my mother was an actress and a singer. They met doing a play in Hollywood, and I came along.
Mickey Dolenz, of course, had been in Circus Boy in the 50s and had toured with his rock band and had a lot of experience both on and off camera. Michael Nesmith had started out in San Antonio, Texas, and originally was very involved in folk music and would actually get on television doing folk music broadcasts.
We had these wildly divergent points of view, but we would not have been in showbiz if we hadn't needed something.
In 1965, more than 400 hopefuls responded to a small ad in Variety announcing auditions for Rafelson and Schneider's new show.
Mike and Peter, I don't know how they came to the audition, probably from the ad. David was signed already, I believe, to Screen Gems. He had a day player, or signed some kind of contract, so he would have been ushered in to this particular interview process. I had an agent, because I'd been doing those little guest spots, so I didn't go to the cattle call, darling. I had my own private audition.
The audition process was, I don't know what to compare it with. I called those people up and they said, well, come on up. And then we just went through the audition process. For me, that meant going into Bert Schneider's office, and he had his feet up on his desk, so I put my feet up on his desk. He offered me a cigarette. I said, I don't smoke those. He said, well, you can't be stoned on the set. I said, okay, I'll be stoned on the set.
And there are these two guys in jeans and T-shirts and dark glasses. I thought they were there for the audition. With me, I thought they're a little older, but they weren't that much older, I think that's why it had that flavor. They were part of that generation, and they wanted to capture that.
I think I'm out of work. I hope I get this serious.
Finding the right actors was one thing, but the show would fail without the right music. The producers turned to a pop duo that had already written hits for Paul Revere and the Raiders and Chubby Checker, Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart.
And when they told us what they were going to do, we were very excited because we knew what combining pop music with television could do as far as promotion. So we talked to him and we said, we're your guys. We got the idea. He said, it's going to be an American Beatles on television. And you guys have seen Hard Day's Night and Help. And yeah, we've seen them and we know what you're doing and we could do the sound counterpart.
Well, I remember a lot about Boyce and Hart because they were my connection to the music. I mean, they were the ones that Bob and Bert and the powers that be had hired to eventually create the Monkee sound, and they are responsible for creating the sound of the Monkees.
I'm not your stepping stone.
They had been hired on before we were even cast to work on the music.
They were very good writers and producers. They were in their own world. They certainly didn't get any idea of what I was about, but they weren't hired to understand me. They were hired to make records.
To manage the music for their new show, producers hired veteran Donnie Kirshner. The force behind such artists is Bobby Darin, Carole King, and Neil Diamond. Meanwhile, Boyce and Hart were trying to create an entire album for a group that was still being invented, and they believed they could produce the album, which meant guiding the Monkees through their recording sessions.
So we're now just a couple of months away from the Monkees television show going on in September. We're probably in July now, and there's no album. So finally, the whole time we've been pulling at Donnie's shirt sleeves and saying, hey, give us a shot. So Donnie came down to the studio, the rehearsal studio, and listened to our arrangements, played live, and he was blown away with the 3 songs that we presented to him. And he said, okay, you guys got the gig back. Go in and book the studio time. You're going to produce the Monkees.
By this time, the 4 Monkees had been cast, as much for their personalities as for their resumes.
The producers of the Monkees series made an interesting choice in that they let the Monkees go out under their own names. They weren't Mickey Dolenz playing Bobby so-and-so, it was Mickey Dolenz as Mickey Dolenz. So, in that sense, the Monkees show was a reflection of who the Monkees were themselves.
Obviously, I was the wacky kind of Jerry Lewis guy. Mike Nesmith was kind of the wry, Will Rogers sort of humor. Davy was the cute love interest. Peter was the Harpo Marx kind of character.
The other 3 guys pretty much played themselves.
It's been said many times that the Monkees were like 4 parts of the perfect man. And the four of them played those roles in varying degrees and brought together one whole, which was a great group.
You bring forth that part of yourself that you think plays into the show. But those guys basically, you know, you saw who they were. Not me, of course. They asked if I didn't mind playing that character in the series. I had created that character as a sort of a defense. If jokes fell flat on their face, I went, oh gosh, as if to say, well, somebody told me it would be funny, what do I know?
In late 1965, the cameras started to roll.
Hey, give me a G.
Television shows were sold on the basis of a pilot episode, and the Monkees pilot, shot according to classic sitcom rules, had problems.
No, it did not test well. And Bob went back, re-edited it, made it edgier, a lot more jump cutty, and one of the things that he did, which I believe had an influence, is he took out the manager. They'd been told by NBC and by, you know, standards and practices, you can't have 4 young 20-year-olds living by themselves, running around, you know, without any supervision, adult supervision. He took him out and then put in the interviews, 2 of them, Davy and Mike's interview, because I understand that people couldn't tell who was who, and there wasn't any connection to the personalities.
You must be joking.
No, I'm not.
What do you want me to do? Sing?
I'll dance one of your little quick things.
Well, I mean, that's your hang-up, man. Not mine. I mean, I know where it's at.
Were you ever a strong and silent girl before?
The new version of the Monkees pilot didn't look like anything on television. And as 1965 ended, Rafelson and his new discoveries headed home for the holidays to await the network's verdict.
Buckle up for the arrivals and departures of 2007, the year in biography.
This year, Hollywood's elite welcomed the
May help prostate health. One-a-day men's.
February, I called up and said, why isn't anybody talking to you? We didn't have your number. We didn't know where you were. We were going crazy over here. The thing's been accepted. Get your butt out here.
NBC was really scared of the show. They were very loath to put a show where you saw long-haired kids on television, because the only time you saw long-haired kids on television at that time was being arrested.
I knew right from the start that if it went at all, it was going to be about as big as it went, because I could see that these guys, Bert Schneider and Bob Rafelson, they really had their hands on the levers of power.
The chemistry the producers hoped for took hold as the Monkees brought their own high spirits to the show.
In comedy, it tends to have to be more of what you're like, because it's hard to fake somebody else's comedy, or not fake it, but it's hard to do somebody else's kind of comedy. So in comedy, it does tend to be more like the character that you are.
So we were basically put together, and they then put us in a room with a guy called Jim Frawley.
He was brought in by Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider because of his background in the theater in the Second City.
Besides being the main director, gave us the technical skills it took to be, I mean, everybody was pretty funny, but to make it work as a professional matter, that's a skill.
And they very specifically did not want us to do the Three Stooges. They showed us all these movies and stuff after we were cast. They showed us Marx Brothers. They showed us Laurel and Hardy. They showed us Abbott and Costello.
Lights, camera, action.
Right from the get-go, it was just like the chemistry worked really, really well on the set. It got tough to control, you know, because they had created this environment, which again was unheard of in Hollywood, to have people improvise all the time, you know. The problem with that is, of course, it's like a nuclear fission reaction. You know, you have to contain it, because if you don't, it melts a hole through the center of the earth. Or if you don't contain it, you let it go, it just goes. And if you contain it too much, you put it out, the fire's out. And I can just see them on the set going, okay, everybody ready? Okay, here they go!
I think the crew weren't really ready for us. We were pretty green, and we did not understand decorum. It was like herding cats.
At first, the Monkees only pretended to play their instruments, even though all four had musical training. In fact, Michael Nesmith and Peter Tork were already accomplished guitarists.
First time we ever played together, we were making the pilot, and we hadn't played together, not a note.
Mickey Dolenz also played guitar, but since the 5'3" Davy Jones was too short to be seen behind a drum set, Dolenz, not a drummer, was sent there instead.
I practiced hard. I remember practicing all the time, driving everybody crazy with a little practice pad and stuff, and then we set up a little studio. One of the first things, even before they built the set, they had this like part of one of the stages cordoned off, and they put in drums and amps and guitars.
But as soon as the camera stopped, you know, on went the amplifiers and the guitars went, and we started playing, and we actually became a good band.
Along with the comedy, each new episode included several songs. While the Monkees were on the set, Boyce and Hart, the music producers, were in the studio, working with other musicians, crafting the Monkees sound.
What would occur is generally a producer, be that one of the Monkees or a songwriter or somebody hired by the company that produced the Monkees, would go in and record backing tracks for the Monkees songs. And then afterwards, they would try and get the Monkees to put vocals onto these backing tracks.
The actual first experience in the studio with the Monkees was when they asked us to put their voices on our tracks to be used in the pilot show. There was so much energy in the room. The four guys were just really getting to know each other.
I'd film the television show for 12 hours and meet Tommy, or drive over with Tommy and Bobby to the studio, and they're showing me lyrics on the way over.
So that's where we met the Monkees. The four guys came in. So after a reasonable amount of time, we went in the control room and said, okay, take one. Monkees theme, take one. And we looked out, and the guys were just clowning around.
Oh, it was terrible. We were just bouncing off the walls. I'm serious. I mean, you just literally.
This happened 2 or 3 times. Third time we looked out there, they were in a dog pile on the floor, wrestling, the 4 of them. You know, this half hour later, we just said, okay, cancel the session. So they actually sold the pilot with Tommy and I. The guys are lip syncing to Tommy and our voices.
We're just trying to be friendly. Come and watch us sing and play. We're the young generation.
But we made a resolve that first time, and we learned a big lesson. We made a resolve that we would never bring more than one Monkee into the studio at once.
As the weeks passed, however, Boyce and Hart realized that the Monkees had genuine musical talent.
And I'd do sometimes 3 lead vocals a night in between filming every day. And Tommy and Bobby were, I remember them as always being the ones that were right there with me all the time.
Well, Tommy and I decided right away that we had 2 really great singers for pop records. We had Davy Jones, who gave us that great English sound that was so popular at the time, of course. And I wouldn't live without her, even if I could. And Mickey Dolenz, who I still think has one of the great pop voices of the 60s. So we just thought it was a wealth that we had two great singers in the group that we really lucked out. So we began to tailor our songs for either Davy or Mickey as we would write them.
In October 1966, the Monkees released their first album.
The Monkees' first album, which was a self-titled release, was coordinated by Don Kirshner, who had been brought in from New York by Bert Schneider and Bob Rafelson to oversee all the music and the content that would be used on the show. Now, initially, this album was seen as sort of a soundtrack to the show, but Don Kirshner actually saw it as a release all unto itself. So the first Monkees album featured their debut single, Last Train to Clarksville, and a number of other songs. Significantly, though, it also featured 2 songs that were written and produced by Michael Nesmith, and also featured Peter Tork on guitar. So from the very beginning of the Monkees' recording career, they did feature on their albums, and the Monkees were involved with the songwriting and production.
Interesting, the analogy between the usual kind of band where they get together on their own versus the Monkees, which you might call an arranged marriage. It's an interesting concept. Statistics seem to indicate that arranged marriages work just about as well as love marriages do. So who's to say, you know?
He crossed the line between country and pop, charmed millions of fans, and made line dancing kinda cool. So why did Nashville's music rock?
Go. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
Critical reaction to the new television show was mixed, but young audiences took the Monkees into their hearts, and a pop phenomenon was born.
I think that the television audiences responded so positively to the Monkees because there was nothing else like it on television.
You know, things were happening so fast as we were recording those first records. Clarksville was already almost top 10 by the time the show went on the air, so that was a big change in our lives. You know, our pictures were in Time magazine on the front of Cashbox.
We were so busy, just mainly just busy during those early months. All the marketing and the success and the fame of the television show and the records, we had no way of knowing.
As we began to see the success of the first album, the numbers that were being put up, I mean, it was beyond all of our dreams.
Sometimes we had to be at work at 7:30 for makeup, start shooting at 8, shoot sometimes till 7 o'clock at night, run across the street, grab a hamburger on the way into the recording studio and do some singing while they were making whatever records we were working on.
I remember, and I think it probably was Tommy Boyce, that came up to me and said, "Picky, you're in the first 1 and 2 in Cashbox." And I said, "What's Cashbox?" I'm telling you, that was my knowledge of the music industry at the time.
From the start, producers saw the group as a money machine, a perfect combination of music and merchandising.
Their second album, More of the Monkees, came out in January of 1967 and was actually their biggest selling album of their career. But it also caused the most problems because at this point, Don Kirshner had taken full control over what they were doing. The front cover featured them dressed in JCPenney's clothing to tie in with the promotion they were doing with JCPenney's. And the track listing was picked all by Don Kirshner to highlight the artists and songwriters that he wanted to highlight. And this was all going to plan.
After 2 hit albums, the group some critics called the Prefab Four was at the center of a nationwide marketing campaign.
Later on, when they endorsed, you know, GTO cars and Tom McCann shoes and JCPenney clothes, you know, they were all freebies and stuff that went on. You know, we didn't just all get a GTO car, 4 cars. We got 24 cars. So executives in the studio were, you know, and we got bikes, motorbikes. We didn't just get 4 motorbikes, we got 10 motorbikes. You know, Monkees rode Honda motorbikes and GTO cars, and so did everybody else at the studio. These were the things that you didn't think about at the time, you know. I would rather have just had 1 car given to me and a couple of $1,000s.
The Monkees themselves were featured on the cover of TV Guide twice, but where they really took hold was in the teen magazines of the day, 16 Magazine, Tiger Beat, Hullabaloo. So the Monkees were really saturating the teen audience. They were in the grocery stores with their Monkees lunchbox.
Little Monkey Mobiles, little finger puppets with the little squeaking things. We had to record for those, and that didn't bother me any. I mean, it was all just part of the game.
They were inescapable in 1967.
The whole merchandising thing, nobody had ever exploited it like this before.
Monkey Mania was building, and the obvious next step was a live concert.
People start to want to meet and see the Monkees in person. Now, initially, they went on a promotional appearance to debut the show, where they went and did meet and greets with audiences in New York and Boston, Chicago, and Los Angeles. But people want to actually see them perform. So the Monkees start to get together a repertoire of songs and work as a 4-piece without any extra musicians, putting together a stage show. And in December of 1966, they debuted the show in Hawaii.
We'd never performed in front of that kind of crowd. We didn't have any idea what we would be getting into. And of course, they sent us to Hawaii because they thought the news, if we were very bad, the news would not get back to mainland America.
But I do remember coming out of those big Vox phony amplifiers in front of God knows how many thousands of screaming. It was just insanity. I don't know how we got through it. You know, me just sitting here watching Mike's heel. Take the last train to Clarksville. I don't know how we got through that first concert, but it wouldn't have mattered. I mean, you couldn't hear a thing anyway.
The concert in Hawaii was a hit, but press coverage was far from positive.
The press had a real grudge against the Monkees, and it wasn't specifically because of their manufactured origins. It was because the press didn't have access to the Monkees.
The publicity was, they don't play their own music, they don't say, well, nobody did. You know, musicians that played and performed and had pretty faces and did whatever they did were not necessarily studio musicians. But we got the brunt of all that.
People just saw the Monkees as a manufactured group and had come from nowhere and had been catapulted to fame without having to pay their dues.
I think the media was a little destructive in regard to their certain comments and things they said, because it wasn't altogether true. But we weren't going to blow the whistle on the Beach Boys and the Byrds, and, you know, Paul McCartney did not play the French horn on Penny Lane, you know.
In fact, the Monkees did pay their dues. They all struggled as musicians prior to being in the group, and this was their chance of success.
The audience is not criticizing what we do. I mean, there was 500-600 girls outside the studio for the first year.
And this guy walks up, he's got a reporter, you know, like that. And he goes, I'm standing with my guitar over my back. And he walks up and he says, is it true that you don't play your own instruments? I said, wait a minute, I'm fixing to walk out there in front of 15,000 people, man. If I don't play my own instruments, I'm in a lot of trouble.
Monkey Mania is just everything you've heard. On stage, it was pandemonium.
There were times when the weight of it, the sheer mass, became frightening because of just the danger involved.
Well, you're never ready for the crazed fans, the screaming teenagers.
I know enough about physics to know that even if you're a 12-year-old girl and you only weigh 80 pounds, something like that, if you have 200, that's a certain amount of mass that if it comes up against a solid object like me, is gonna cause some damage.
When I went to a Beatles concert and they screamed, I thought, you guys aren't listening. These guys are the greatest musicians of all time and you're not listening to them. And
with their albums at the top of the charts, the Monkees were becoming pop stars. They were making real money, but it was Don Kirshner who made the decisions.
In the first season, the Monkees were paid about $450 a week. In the second series, they got a raise, and they got $750 a week, and they were still getting paid the same amount for concerts. Now, where they really made their money was with record royalties. And in fact, they were paid fairly well for the time, and their records sold in the millions, so they were getting huge checks from Don Kirshner.
Donnie Kirshner was the man with the golden ear, and he knew how to select and arrange to have produced great pop records.
The problem was that they really didn't respect Don Kirshner because they wanted more input in their music.
And then you had a guy in the dynamic by the name of Michael Nesmith, who'd been around a little bit, knew the value of songwriting. He'd already written a hit, and he wasn't going for it. And so right away, within a couple of months, he was on the warpath, and it didn't take long for him to get Peter Tork, the other musician who had become an actor, to go along with him.
We wanted to slide into being the musicians on our own records, and Donnie took great umbrage at this and blew his stack. And all we ever wanted was for Donnie to go on being Donnie, but we wanted to be the musicians on the record, that's all. And Donnie didn't hear that. He heard, oh, the boys are trying to take over your job, and he went bonkers.
Drive431.com or call 1-800-856-7262 now.
135.
The Monkees viewed themselves as co-creators of their television show and also wanted to manage their music. But Don Kirshner had different ideas and held tight control over all aspects of the music.
He saw the potential of them as recording artists beyond what Bert Schneider and Bob Rafelson ever did. They just saw the record releases to be an adjunct to the television show. He saw the record releases as something totally different, and he took as much credit as he could because he did put together those records. He selected the songs, and he selected how they were going to sound and how they were going to look and everything else. But because the Monkees really wanted to be a part of the music, and Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider didn't care so much about the music, they said, let's get rid of Don Kirshner. He's making way too much money. Let's let the Monkees do what they want, because ultimately all we care about is the television show.
We really needed to create some sort of musical entity amongst ourselves. And if it wasn't for Mike, that would never have happened.
It's possible that Mike and Peter thought they would have more input into the music right when they were being hired. It's hard to say what was told.
So at the time I was frustrated because I thought we were being denied a chance to do what we needed to do, but we had a TV show to make.
So the Monkees got their way, and only about 6 months after Kirshner had brought them to success, they were in control of their own musical destiny.
It was a gradual thing that happened. Gradually, there became a camaraderie between the four of us, and Mike played on that and said, come on, guys, we really need to be the ones that are doing this. And I mean, I think he was right. That did have to happen.
So in February 1967, Don Kirshner released a third single by the Monkees called A Little Bit Me, A Little Bit You. And the Monkees had initially wanted him to include one of their songs on the flip side of that record. He completely refused to do that. In fact, he issued it without that song in Canada, without their approval. And so that gave Columbia Pictures grounds to get rid of him. The Monkees went on to record a whole album on their own, just the four of them with the new producer Chip Douglas, and this was called Headquarters.
When Kirshner left, he didn't take all his songwriters with him. They were still the Screen Gems Columbia songwriters. And of course, we, availed ourselves of the best songwriters we could find. We weren't under any illusion that we could write as well as Carole King. I mean, good God. We got a Carole King song? Sure, we're going to do it. You bet your bippy.
And so they provided all the backing, they selected the songs, and they, in fact, wrote a number of the songs that were on the record, and it became a homegrown project in which they got together as a group. A group that had never been a group became a group.
Would you put C-A-N, C-A-N.
The Monkees had a tremendous opportunity. They're already a giant recording act, and so even though they had no previous experience producing in the studio and even writing, except for Nesmith, they had the opportunity to go in there and write for a hit act, which is themselves. And so they did it, and it was a wonderful experience for all of them.
So after Mike spearheaded this revolution, and we stood on the barricades and waved the flags and sang, we shall overcome. To some degree, in that sense, he was the manager of the band. Then was like, then what?
Peter, stars make more than $100 a week.
They do?
Sure they do.
With Kirshner gone, the Monkees were finally making their own music.
Everybody brought in songs. Everybody said, this is what we want to do. And of course, we had, like I said, we had the Screen Gems Columbia songbook to work from.
I was just like, show up and play and sing for Headquarters. And Headquarters was, as everybody knows, the first kind of Monkee album by that group, the Monkees.
The decisions as to what songs went on Headquarters, that one was probably just consensus.
Today, still, of course, one of my favorites, because it was, really was from us and from our hearts and soul.
Headquarters was released in May of 1967 and became their third straight chart-topping album. It was a million seller and did very, very well. The one thing that was significant about the summer of 1967 was the Beatles unleashed their masterwork, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. So while Sgt. Pepper was #1 on the charts, Headquarters sat at #2 for the entire summer, but it did top the charts the week before Sgt. Pepper came out, and it was continually a big seller.
By the time we went through the transition where we had the Kirshner explosion, by that time we were much more assured as musicians. We'd already been on the road, we'd played gigs, we'd been a band.
The Monkees went on a tour in summer of '67 at the height of their popularity, and it was really an incredible journey because they had their own private plane, they had their own hand-picked opening acts. It was promoted by Dick Clark. They did record-setting stadium dates throughout the country. It was really the apex of their celebrity.
Looking for acts to open their show, the Monkees engineered one of the most unusual pairings in rock and roll history, a temporary alliance with guitar icon Jimi Hendrix.
I was in New York in like February of '67, and somebody said, you got to go out and hear this guy play guitar with his teeth.
We were down in the Village, and Mickey went into this bar, and there was Jimi Hendrix playing his guitar, playing it with his teeth and playing it behind his back, and then he lit it on fire. We thought, vaudeville, this is good.
And I thought, well, the Monkees are theatrical, and he's theatrical, and it's great music, and it's really cool, and he looks great.
Then when we got him on the stage, obviously, it wasn't the audience is shouting, "We want Davy."
He's out there going, "Foxy lady, we want Davy, we want the Monkees. Police coming, my Monkees."
And so, he ended up at Forest Hill Stadium taking his guitar and throwing it at the audience and walking off. I think his set was finished at the time, and he was going to set his guitar on fire anyway.
They did just an amazing job throughout the summer, and also at the same time, they were recording their fourth album. So these guys were just working 24 hours a day, and the response they got live was just pandemonium. They had people screaming from the beginning to ends of their performances, but they also it was kind of a pity because they put on probably the best stage show of any group going at the time.
Gianni Versace is living the Dolenz.
Stop on by Overstock.com and get free shipping on thousands of products, guaranteed to arrive by December 24th. Log on, save, and live better with Overstock.com.
On tour, the Monkees were at the peak of their popularity. Bob Rafelson, however, had a new project for the band, a feature film.
Their television series was just wrapping production, and they were just getting involved in writing and conceiving what would be their feature film head.
Bob and Bert come to us one day and say, we're going to make a movie. And we're like, oh, cool, man. I remember someone suggesting that it not be a 90-minute Monkee episode. I also thought that was a good idea. So Bob one day brings on the set this guy named Jack Nicholson, B-movie actor, wanted to write. They must have hit it off somewhere, really connected. And he introduces us to Jack.
The four of us guys, Bert Schneider, Bob Rafelson, and Jack Nicholson, all went to a motel in Ojai, California, and talked about it.
Talking about what we want to do, what we don't want to do, what turns us on, what doesn't turn us on, what'd be cool, what's not cool. Mike was the one, God love him, who said, well, we're going to get a writing credit on this, and somebody must have said no. And Mike took the tapes and put them in the trunk of his car. We didn't get writing credit, as it turned out. He turned over the tapes. But Jack wrote the movie.
Head is really the jumping off point of where the Monkees went right and where they went wrong. The one thing you see in it is that the Monkees wish to escape from their reality. And eventually it sort of wrote their story, because at the end of the movie, when it was released, they ran away from their public and their success.
Oh, it was a total bomb.
I just think it was an avant-garde movie that the kids weren't told it was an avant-garde movie, and the avant-gardes didn't want to see the Monkees, the prefab four, frolic.
Bob and Bert seem to have changed the face of the way motion pictures were made, and it started with the Monkees because that would give them their leverage to go on and do things like 5 Easy Pieces and Easy Rider.
The Monkees were still an attractive property, and in 1969, NBC aired a special entitled 33 1/3 Revolutions per Monkee. It would be their last appearance on the network.
They got an offer from NBC to do 3 one-hour spectaculars. Now, ultimately, only one was produced.
And it was on the same night as the Oscars, which were live. So where it was up against the Oscars, it died a terrible death.
If Head had taken them to the avant-garde, this was really, really something that no one had ever seen on television. The people at the network saw this and were not prepared to pay out for the other two.
NBC lost interest in the Monkees and canceled the series after just 2 seasons. One of the group's members also called it quits.
So at the end of shooting their television special in 1968, Peter Tork had had enough of being in the group. He couldn't really get what he wanted out of the group unit, and so he decided to leave.
I have to say that the decision was all right for me, that I left first. I think there was I think there was no more left in the Monkees.
And when the fun stopped, the records ceased to be the hits anymore. It was kind of interesting to watch that process.
So their first release of 1968 was The Birds, Bees, and the Monkees, and it was their first album not to top the charts.
3 short years after the audition that brought them together, the Monkees disbanded. Then in 1969, CBS put Monkees reruns into its Saturday morning lineup.
They came back as a Saturday morning favorite and won their time slot in 1969 through the early 70s, and then became a staple of syndicated television from there on out.
If the Monkees goes off the air, I'll never eat my vegetables again.
On television, the Monkees were back. In the popular imagination, it's as if they never left. Somehow the artificial creations of a TV sitcom became a real live band.
The Monkees have a variety of audiences. They have their original audience from the 60s, they have a whole other audience from the 80s, and then now in more recent times they've gained a new audience from people on the internet.
It's heartwarming to see that the music does stand up after all of these years. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's visual, that you get to see these groups having fun and being entertaining.
On their 30th anniversary, they got together to do a whole new album called Just Us, which was the four of them in the studio together, a la Headquarters, doing an album. They will continue to reunite and break up and be together and be apart as long as they're alive. But in our memories, they'll always be the Monkees.
Here we come.
It was a collection of four guys from basically different backgrounds who brought together brothers in arms, you know, for a couple of years.
There was this element of anarchy, of no authority, you know. It was egalitarian and not top-down.
And the Monkees took that sensibility of young kids growing your hair long, not so much protesting, but not just taking everything for granted, and took that sensibility and kind of brought it in the living room and made it okay to play pop music. It wasn't in rock and roll. It wasn't the music of the devil. You know, it was just fun, and the theme song essentially says that.
Collectively, have you got something to say that's really important?
Well, first of all, we're the young generation, and we've got something to say. Hey, we're the Monkees. You never know where we'll be found, so you better get ready. We may be coming to your town.
So you had a perfect childhood, went to the best schools, got a great job, married the ideal spouse, got rich, and are living happily ever after. Uh-huh.
My dad went to prison.
Clearly was not the best parent in the world.
We aren't perfect.
The way life really happens. Biography, Wednesday and Thursday at 9, only on Bio. True story.